imitation of the real thing. I admire idealists, and sometimes I wish we had more of them in the Middle East, or in the White House. But we don't. Let's look at the situation rationally, logically, and in all seriousness. Right now in the Middle East, we have a very tense situation, and I think that's all been very credibly explained. Not, however, with all the relevant material. There are not just two countries in the Middle East. There's not just Iran, there's not just Israel. There are a multiplicity of countries. There are a multiplicity of countries developing in some way or another nuclear technology. Turkey itself, Turkey, an ally of the West, a NATO country, a candidate for EU membership, possibly an EU member state in 10 or 15 years. A secular state is developing nuclear technology in order to get out of oil dependency on Russia or Saudi Arabia. These countries have a right to strategic energy independence. Egypt is seeking to develop nuclear technology for similar reasons, and also as an economic bonus. Israel has nuclear technology to allow her strategic energy independence, but also for strategic reasons, in order to ensure her long-term survival. And Iran, yes, we know about Iran, but Iran is a complicated country. There are many different sources of power, there are many different overlapping forms of rhetoric. We can't take Iran at face value, and we can't look at the Iranian people, some of the least religious, and in many ways some of the most democratic and with the most developed civil society, purely in the lens of those. Oh no, thank you, 5 minutes. Now let's have a look at the resolutions being proposed for this region. A region of independent actors, a region of fierce national interest, a region of countries with strong alliances with the United States, a region with strong enemies in the United States. And sadly, I think a United Nations resolution trying to strictly ban nuclear technology in the region is implausible on that. First and foremost, the United Nations, I'm sure you're aware, is composed of the Security Council and of the General Assembly. The Security Council contains the United States, a staunch ally of Israel. The United States, if it was to back this motion, would have to break its alliance with Israel. It would have to become, for all intents and purposes, an enemy of what Israel views as her strategic independence. Please, can I have 2 or 3 minutes? If the Russians, the Americans, would almost certainly veto this. The Russians are in many ways backing the Iranians. They can almost certainly veto this. And what makes you think that a Security Council resolution would be backed in the Middle East? I am well aware that yesterday the Iranian government superseded a Security Council resolution trying to restrict its nuclear technology development. You may say, well, we can impose sanctions. Sadly, it doesn't work like that. France, Russia, China have very big economic interests in developing nuclear technology. In Iran, in Turkey, in Egypt, and in Jordan, another Middle Eastern Western ally. I simply do not think that the members of the Security Council, we must remember the UN is not an independent actor, but the member states, will back these proposals. Now let's have a closer look at how such a resolution would be received in the Middle East. Westerners often like to think of the world in terms of the West and the rest. That here in the West, with our high ideals, our high civilization, we can simply tell errant scamps like Iran or Israel how to behave. I'm afraid things don't work like that anymore. When the Iranian population was half that of the United Kingdom, we could easily just topple Mossack there. Now, the Iranian population is the same as that of the United Kingdom, and in many ways Iran is better armed and stronger than Britain, and certainly a far more powerful Middle Eastern actor, with possibly more troops in Iraq. You can't tell Iran how to behave. You can't just say that we in the West have decided to impose a resolution and an opinion on you. Now let's move out of the fact that out of that fact, Israel clearly an independent actor, as is Iran, and let's look at the possible benefits. Ironic enough, that nuclear technology could bring to the Middle East. These points will be developed further by my fellow speakers, but there is a proven correlation, which some of you may have read in recent foreign policy magazines, between the price of oil and the amount of oil going into the coffers of executives or state governments or armies, and the rate of tyranny and the Freedom House Index collapsing. Would it not be such a bad idea if other forms of energy, and nuclear energy is simply the most easily and readily available technology that Iran, Egypt or Turkey can access, to provide alternative sources, to change things to a certain degree, to provide overlapping controls between elements of civil society, legislators and executives. That's probably not a very strong argument, but it is a possibility. And now let's look at let's have a look at why the Middle East is fundamentally this breeding ground of hatred, which I am delighted you put so fluently. It's because of poverty. It's because poverty is the breeding ground of suffering and hate and rejection, reaction, and often idealism. The poverty of the Middle East comes from the fact the region is locked out of the loop of globalisation, locked out of the loop of global competition, and has to rely on expensive energy sources, has to rely on other powers, doesn't have industries of its own. Ahmadinejad,
on that point,
I'm afraid not 1 minute. Ahmadinejad sees himself in many ways like John F. Kennedy, the stunning president of the United States with nuclear ambitions. He sees himself as radically developing his country's industries to provide a secure and safe source to energise his country, provide jobs for the unemployed, and launch his country into high economic growth rates. You can't discount that. You can't tell the Iranian people that they are not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to do this in the manner they see fit. And we will be developing on this idea of rights. Clearly, countries have rights to define how they operate, to define the relationship with other countries. Okay.
So far you've mentioned that the Middle East is more than just Israel and Iran. Granted. However, in your analysis, you failed to bring up the idea of non-state actors. How would you account for non-state actors in your analysis?
I'll move on to that in maybe 2 or 3 minutes. A very good point. We're going to come off this question of rights. Iran, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Jordan believe they have a right to define themselves, often, as Turkey has, in similarity with the West, sometimes in contrast. And if these countries have chosen the right to develop peaceful nuclear technology, as Jordan, Egypt and Turkey wish clearly, according to Western intelligence analysis and their own sources to do, and Iran wishes possibly, there's not been proven, this has only been proven by American intelligence sources, and we know how reliable those are. We should truly respect this. Now, I'd like to talk about old-fashioned diplomacy and new diplomacy. Old-fashioned diplomacy is Western bullying. It's gumbo diplomacy. It's invasion. It's Security Council resolutions that no one respects. I'm sure everyone in this audience is aware that both Israel, Iran, Egypt, Turkey, Jordan, the United States, Russia, China have all broken countless UN Security Council resolutions. I'm afraid these are meaningless, and you're right, they can have a subtle shift in opinion, but the UN is so discredited, so bankrupt, so forgotten, that I very much doubt they'll have the desired effect. These countries in the region will not listen to UN Security Council resolutions anymore, and so we need new forms of diplomacy. John Snow, the former BBC ITN reporter of Channel 4 News, was speaking at Trinity College a week ago, and this passionate plea of a journalist who is one of the very few people in the British media to have been to Iran, to know Iran, and to understand the country to a certain degree, unlike many in America, and I remind you, America has had no contact with Iran since 1979, made an impassioned plea for dialogue, made an impassioned plea for Britain and America and France and Germany and China to engage with Iran. Thank you very much. I would like to propose a bold new alternative to a barren Security Council resolution. I think that peaceful development requires a return to old forms of international diplomacy. The old forms of international diplomacy, the international conference. It requires talking to Syria and Iran. And I would like to propose a bold step by our Prime Minister, that he go to Tehran to negotiate. We have nothing to lose, and certainly neither does he. The very least we can hope for is to establish dialogue with these regimes, to show that we respect them, we understand them, but we will not let them sponsor non-state actors like Hezbollah, etc., etc. Thank you very much.